Welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear some creepy stories that happened to people while they were alone. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe as it will help me grow. Since I am a small channel, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get started. Story 1. I was 18 and home alone a couple summers ago. I had been playing Skyrim all night, and eventually it was 3 a.m. My very quiet dog starts barking from the kitchen, so I just assume he has to go outside. I get up and with my controller in my hand, I walk into my kitchen where a solid 6'3", 225-pound mountain of a man is standing with my dog barking at him. All I can think of saying is, "What are you doing in my house?" He responded with a slurred, "I thought it was a frat house. I live in a college town and only about 5 minutes from campus." I tell him, "Well, it's not, so get out." He leaves out of the back door. It wasn't until he was finally gone and I'd locked the door that I had the realization that it could have ended much worse than a drunk guy wandering into the wrong house. Story 2. Not me, but my friend. We had a running joke in high school where someone once said I'd lock the door in a funny voice. Shit joke, but it made us laugh when we were 14. Skip ahead about 10 years, and I suddenly remember this in-joke, and text my friend I'd locked the door. About an hour later, I got a phone call from an angry man asking who I am. It turned out that I just got a new phone. My friend didn't have my number, and he was alone in his house. He receives a text telling him to lock the door. He ran downstairs to lock the door and then freaked out. He called his dad to see what he should do. His dad rang me. Really stupid story. Story 3. I was 8. Walking to school, a man drove up and asked me where he could find the hand shop. I assumed he was talking about a hand tool shop, so I pointed in the direction of our local hardware store. He kept saying, "No, a hand shop, hand shop." I heard the school's warning bell sound and said, "Sorry, I'm late," and ran off to school. I told my friend about this encounter, who then told the teacher. Next thing I know, I'm being interviewed at the police station and looking at mugshots. I point one out, describe the glasses that he wore and the vehicle he drove, green, boxy. But I also felt stupid, because I couldn't state the make, model, tag number, etc. When my mother showed up, I overheard the detective telling her that this guy has been approaching children recently, but they can't do anything because he doesn't grab them or expose himself. But they believe he has bad intentions and would love to get him off the street. After this, I became hyper-vigilant about my surroundings. My uncle would quiz me on cars. I made sure I knew my north, south, east, and west and the names of all streets and the difference between road, avenue, street, etc. I would also run through scenarios and how to properly react if this ever happened again. Guess what? Nearly 1 year later, this same piece of shit approached me again on my way to school. Same car, same glasses. But this time, he was shaking his willy at me. I screamed at him to leave me alone. I picked up a rock, and as he was driving away, I threw it and cracked his rear window. Memorized his license plate, and immediately ran to the nearest store and asked them to call the cops and write down the tag number. This time, when I was interviewed, I had his tag, described the color of his mid-70s 4-door Plymouth, the layer that drove north on XX Avenue towards XX Street as I ran south to XX Boulevard. I also reminded them that this creep now has a cracked rear window, driver's side, upper left. He was caught, jailed, and sentenced to 2 years for lewdness against a child. I don't know why such little time, perhaps because he didn't touch me. A few months later, the lead detective sent me a thank you note, commending me on my level-headed thinking and attention to detail. He offered to write a letter of recommendation if I ever wanted a job in law enforcement. We kept in touch. 11 years later, I took him up on his offer. I have recently retired after 26 years of honorable service. Story 4. Some background. I'm from India, where we wear anklets with small bells on our feet. A couple of years back, I was sleeping when I heard a sound coming from the room outside in the middle of the night. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, the sound starts again and is much louder, and I can tell that it's coming nearer to my door. The sound becomes clearer, and I can tell that it's the sound of an anklet. Suddenly, my door opens on its own, and the sound starts nearing my bed. I'm literally about to shit in my pants, because in our culture, the sound of anklets means that a banshee or ghostly woman is near. I lay very still bed, hoping to God that it's just a dream. The sound is right next to my bed, and I just shut my eyes really tight when I hear a small woof. Turns out my puppy was up in the middle of the night, playing with a new toy that has a couple of small bells inside of it. And he wanted to play fetch with me. Story 5. When I was 16, I was working at a restaurant at Bussa. On this particular night, I got out around midnight, when normally I'd get out at 10. But I stayed and helped some of the servers get their tables situated. Well, I also didn't own a vehicle yet, and I needed to wait outdoors because the restaurant was closed, and I needed to wait for my mum to pick me up from work. The servers had asked if I needed a ride home, naturally, but I told them no, because my mum had said she was on her way already. Normally we have security that drives around the perimeter, because the restaurant was right in front of an old, poorly lit, abandoned strip mall that was constantly being vandalized. This night was a little different though. No security in sight. Maybe it was because of the lateness of the hour, or security was just not working that night. Who knows? I ended up sitting under one of the surrounding trees, which had a few noisy little birds resting in them at night. There was a light breeze that night. It was pretty overcast, and the occasional gleam of moonlight shone through the clouds and illuminated the abandoned strip mall's huge parking lot. 15 minutes had passed waiting for my ride. I debated whether or not to call my mum on my little Samsung flip phone that I was currently playing the trial version of Tetris on. I kept playing. Suddenly I feel the small breeze around me become more like a gale of air enveloping me, and the tree that I was sitting under seemed to come alive with it, occupants quickly dispersing in all directions. I immediately look up and I see this monstrous black object fly overhead. Its general shape reminded me of a vulture, a very large vulture. Its wingspan was that of anywhere from 10 to 12 feet, and it was terribly loud, almost like a boom with each flap it took. I sat quietly, hoping that it wouldn't hear me over its own noise, and I watched in awe on how large this thing was. It was finally landing, probably a good 100 feet away under a dimly lit light in the parking lot. It was facing away from me as it landed. Its body size was unreal, having to have been at least my height at the time. I was about 5'6". Its general demeanor was ominous. It was hunched over, black as night feathers covering its entire body, and it was barely moving. All the while, I was looking around to see if someone was witnessing the same thing I was. No one in sight, as I suspected. It seemed that right when I had come to the conclusion that I was all alone, it started turning towards my direction, slowly shuffling around on its huge talon-like feet towards my direction. All the while, I'm still sitting under the tree, trying to stay quiet and calm as possible, but I knew it could see me. My work uniform's top was as white as snow, easily contrastable from the shadow of the tree I was under. I could feel its gaze on me, but I couldn't quite see its eyes. Yet, more birds from other trees quickly took flight like mine had, which made me look up in fright. At that point, it definitely knew I was there. It started walking slowly, and at that point I noticed its dark, glassy eyes, almost pitting in its skull from slits of dark feathers. Its beak was not that of a beak at all. It was more prehistoric looking, with no feathers covering it, and leathery looking. It looked like something from a Jurassic Park movie or dinosaur documentaries I'd watched when I was younger. Similar to that of a pterodactyl. Its walk slowly turned in to a quicker pace, and I noticed it was coming for me. I felt like I was soon going to become its prey, because it then started flapping its wings again, as if to try and take flight towards me. Fight or flight was kicking in, and I quickly leapt up of the shoulder of the parking lot's curb and started screaming and flailing my arms as loud and hard as I could possibly do. It was enough to scare it off. It had taken flight and slowly circled back around the direction it previously had landed and kept going until it flew over the abandoned mall, never to be seen again. 5 minutes later, my mum finally shows up. I'm hysterical, telling her all that had happened. She just stares at me as we pull up in our driveway. I'm slightly teary-eyed and frantic, but for good measure, she asks if I was taking drugs. And no, I was not. I've never dabbled in drugs. Anyway, I can tell she doesn't believe me. There's so much doubt in her face it makes me upset, and I don't want to talk about it again. But only to a few friends and a coworker. After a few months, it's quickly forgotten. And I just start keeping it to myself because people were doubting me constantly. I didn't want to be ridiculed any longer, so I just stopped telling it altogether and live with that frightening memory. Well, a few months later, down the road, a local news station here in San Antonio, TX, which all of this occurred at, reports a giant black bird seen over parts of Texas, including sightings from the 1970s, and as recent as that reported sighting on man's house that evening. The name they gave this creature was that of a prehistoric bird called the thunderbird, for the loud boom that is heard when it's flying. My family saw the show and were deeply regretful that they didn't believe me beforehand. I never reported it. I thought it was too late to do so at the time. I can at least say I've seen this creature in person, and it's quite terrifying. I wouldn't wish it on any of my worst enemies. Story 6. This happened while I was in college. My roommate's cousin owned this club, and while it wasn't particularly rowdy, there was enough cause for a couple of bouncers. I wasn't a very burly guy, and I didn't have any military police experience at the time, but my roommate got me a job as a doorman there. One Friday night, we were closing up. It was just me, the bartender, and the manager straightening things out. I told the bartender to go home and get some rest. He was a student, like me, though he had it much worse than I did. He was like a fourth-year junior or something, because he had to work so much that he could only take a few amount of credits per semester. So I continued cleaning up in one corner of the room, when I hear these bottles clinking at the bar, and this woman in a white gown was sitting there on the bar with her back towards me. I spoke up and asked her if she knew the place was closed, and how I need her to leave. She turns her towards me with this sheepish grin on her face, and she hops off the bar and ducks behind it. At this point I was confused, but I walk over there telling her she needs to go. I go around the bar, and there's no one under there. At that point, I was pretty unnerved, and I got on the phone to call the manager who was in her office. I asked her if she had invited a friend over for a drink or something, and she tells me that she did no such thing. So she comes downstairs and asks what the hell is wrong with me, because I kept turning around expecting this woman to materialize out of thin air. I explained to my manager what happened, and I insist that we check the security cameras. I think a part of me was hoping that it was just some kind of prank. So we review the footage, and it shows me talking to myself while facing the bar. That was when I truly became scared, and I backed away from the monitor slowly. My manager told me to just finish wiping down the tables and to go home and sleep. Let me tell you, I never felt the same way again in that place again. Story 7. This happened when I was about 17. My family home from UK is from the 14th century and used to be a courthouse. I'm alone in my house one day, and have just got out of the bath. I come onto the landing when suddenly I hear a noise downstairs. A faint tinkling tune. Then I realize what it is. It's the music box in the study. The music box plays Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. It's a creepy tune when it's playing on an antique music box. It's creepier still when you're alone in your house and haven't even been in the room with the music box in it that day, let alone touched it. And it's fucking terrifying when you happen to know that the hinges of the relatively heavy lid when you lift the lid the music plays are broken, meaning someone or something has to lift a 6x6 piece of heavyish metal cleanup in order to play the music. My instant conclusion was that a psychopath had broken into the house and was playing the music box as some sort of warm-up to an axe murdering. I run into my room and barricade the door shut with my chest of drawers. I call my parents and tell them what happened. They're on their way back, so I sit tight. Shout hello, but no answers. Parents arrive home. Music box lid had indeed been lifted up and placed next to the box. No one else in house. Story 8. Home alone with my 2-year-old daughter, when out of nowhere she stops playing and runs to me crying, "The man, the man." She climbs in my lap, buries her face in my shirt, and is screaming in absolute fear. She peeks up for a second, and the man must have reached towards her because she was squirming as if to back away from him while still in my lap, and crying unconsolably, "The man, Mummy, the man." I was scared as shit, so I opened the door and told the man to get the fuck out of my house. My daughter calmed down, and we were upstairs in my room when the man came and scared the shit out of her again. This time I grabbed my daughter and keys and left quickly. After I buckled her in her car seat and got in the driver's seat, she started crying and screaming again, but this time pointing and hiding her face, as that fucker had clearly come outside with us. I hauled ass out the neighborhood and was scared as shit to return home for a few hours. Story 9. One time I was watching my 3-year-old niece and fell asleep on the couch. I woke up suddenly by a man's voice, very loudly, yelling my name right above me. I jolted up and there was no one there. At first I was slightly creeped out, but then I brushed it off, because that had happened to me before, and the only logical answer I could think that it was that I dreamt the voice and it startled me awake. So I got up and I couldn't see my niece anywhere. Then I realized she was crouched behind a side table in the corner. So I went over there and I asked her what was wrong, because she was literally shaken, scared. She then told me she was hiding because she was scared, and I asked her what she was scared of. She then pointed to the ceiling behind me. Right above here, I thought I heard the voice. Still creepy. Story 10. I worked at a grocery store doing the bitch work at night, when the store was closed and all the other employees had gone home. The other guy who was supposed to work called out sick, so I was flying solo for the night. I was cleaning stuff by the front of the store when I heard some strange banging noise coming from the back warehouse for several seconds. I thought it was weird and maybe something had fallen over, so I walked back there to see if anything has happened. I walk through the doors and there is no mess or anything out of place. I go back to my business in the front part of the store and I hear the noise again. I walk back to the warehouse again and find nothing out of the ordinary. So I take a walk around the warehouse. Nothing seems out of place, so I walked back out to the front and continue by bitch work. I heard the noise again. This time it was louder and longer. I thought maybe a truck had crashed into the cargo doors or something. I walk through the doors and I see a box flying from one corner of the warehouse to the other corner of the warehouse. I turned around and ran out the front door. I called the buddies who come to the store and check it out with me. We never found anything out of place. I stopped working the night shift shortly after that. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. I post 4 to 5 times a week or more, so if you like listening to stories while you work, I got you. Hope you have an absolutely amazing. You can check my other videos on screen,